This is just another video that's about Husserlian phenomenology. I'm trying to give good discussions about, about Husserl's phenomenology, about the parts of it. The last few are ones that I had not discussed before. I mean, I've discussed a lot of things. I had like 39 videos in the phenomenology playlist, something like 40 or something. I made like, I don't know, three or four today, or maybe 2, 3, 4. But I want to discuss here the transcendental ego of Husserl. First of all, Husserl, when he's looking at the world as well as the ego, he goes about it by looking at essences. Essences is looking at kinds, I guess. Essences, the group of things that are a certain way, kinds of things that are grouped in a certain way. But then, when you go to Heidegger, Sartre, and beyond that, Heidegger existentialized the transcendental ego, as did Sartre. So, essentially, we're talking about this transcendental ego, and if you want to read about the transcendental ego, well, first of all, Husserl, in the logical investigations, he just kind of postulated the ego as a stream of consciousness. He didn't feel the need to discuss any kind of ego, but then in the ideas, he did give a very good description of his kind of transcendental ego, and that's where we get the ideas that are attributed to the idea with it as the ego pole, the place where intentional acts emanate and belong to. Intentionality, unity of meaning in intentionality. I mean, intentionality of things or of phenomena, as well as temporality. So that's later when he did that. So in this video, I just kind of want to compare a little bit Husserl's transcendental ego as well as Heidegger's being in the world, or Dasein. The Dasein is it's existentialized, essentially, and from Heidegger onward, has this idea existence before essence, where Husserl could, looked at things based upon essences, and then existence was a secondary concern. But I think it's interesting to look at Husserl's idea of the ego. It's been charged towards him. He's been accused of having a philosophy as well as an idea of the ego that is not only subjectivist but solipsistic. So I guess I want to kind of discuss Husserl's transcendental ego in a good amount of depth, and then compare it briefly, if not a little bit more than briefly, to Heidegger's Dasein and being in the world, and try to compare the two and see which one we're gonna see. I guess see which one is better if we're going to try and use it in any kind of, not only an ethical theory, but any practical normative theory. Because my concern is that I want to figure out which one is better to use, because you have to have a good idea about how the self is, or how the ego sits, or how you explain the ego, if you're going to have a phenomenological kind of ethics. So you have to, a phenomenological ethics, if you read Werner Marx, that's, he does a good job with that. So I guess my reason for doing this, because I want to look at one. I'm leaning more towards Heidegger here, but that's a typical thing. Anyway, the ego of Husserl, the transcendental ego. There's consciousness of a couple of different. There's a couple of things that are involved here. First is the consciousness of temporality. Heidegger in Being in Time, as well as the history of the concept of time and the concept of time, is a lot of what Heidegger does there. Husserl, however, goes into much depth about temporal consciousness in the phenomenology of the consciousness of internal time. That's where he discusses the whole continuum of the stream of consciousness in one unified continuum. So I guess he discusses protensions and retentions in that book, as well as a lot more in depth. It's just really interesting if you like phenomenological philosophy. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have it. That's like one of the only books by Husserl I do not have. So I don't know. I'd like to have that. This is a necessary form of combining mental processes with mental processes. So essentially, this idea of being temporally conscious, conscious of temporality, as well as consciousness of phenomena. This gives a certain unity of meaning of consciousness within the ego. Second, we have something called passive synthesis. Passive synthesis is kind of hard to explain, but you have active synthesis and you have passive synthesis. Passive synthesis is something that you have inherent in the transcendental ego. It's a pre-predicative. It's pre-predicative, where an object is constituted as an identity among a manifold of things. So, pretty much, active synthesis is when you're actively perceiving and actively judging. Like, active synthesis is where I'm looking at this remote, and I'm actively looking at it and making certain judgments about it. Passive synthesis is where if I'm sitting back here, just kind of like chilling out and like just kind of whatever. Say I'm watching TV or something. I'm watching TV or something, and it's just kind of I'm watching the TV, yet it's not like I have to be immediately conscious of these couches, or the cat sitting on the couch, or the remotes, or the love seat, or the coffee table, or the pictures around, or the clock, or lamps, or anything here. I don't have to be conscious directly of anything like that while I'm sitting here watching TV. So passive synthesis is like identity of certain objects among a manifold of things. That's a kind of a bad way of explaining it. But active synthesis is if I'm looking at each item, or let's say I'm looking at this remote and I'm judging it actively and looking at it actively. That's one thing I could go into discussion about highlighting data. So that's passive synthesis is one thing that's inherent in the ego. So pretty much we have this ego pole, this place where intentional acts emanate and belong to. So this is an active, these are intentional and categorical acts of the ego that come from and belong to this ego pole. And for the transcendental ego, it's a part of the whole essentialist kind of idea of Husserl. It's not existentialized. It's essentialized. That's pretty much what a lot of things are for Husserl. They are essentialized. They are not existentialized. So essentially, from this pole, we have this double intentionality, temporality, and a phenomena. and we are. This is sort of a unity of meaning, but then we have the principle of self-awareness. This is the awareness of the world, entailing consciousness of itself in being aware of. It's pretty much like it's not like an intentional act of me upon myself, but this is more like a function of the transcendental ego. It's more just that I am aware of myself being aware. So that's just that's another inherent part. Next, the substrate of habitualities. This is pretty much self-constitution, or ego constituting itself for itself among a history of meaning or unity of meaning. So where if the ego judges or makes a judgment about a certain thing, then it can be pointed out that that certain ego judged that certain thing. So essentially we have, with this ego, we have a unity of meaning, a unity of intentionality, and we can get this sort of history of judgments in this history, based upon the temporal continuum, as well as history upon. Well, it's basically history that comes from the temporal continuum, and that's unifying all the meaning into one kind of history of the ego itself. So these are the things which are inherent in the transcendental ego of Husserl. So let's pretty much what that is. This is an essential. It's looking at an essence. It's looking at a certain this certain kind of stream of consciousness which emanates, which releases intentional consciousness, as well as it belongs to that. And this is, we're looking at lots of streams of consciousness, and we're talking about the transcendental ego as the same. We're talking about this kind of consciousness. So we're looking at essences. So let's think about Heidegger's being in the world and Dasein with respect to this. Dasein is in each case mind, which he talks about being in the world, being with, being alongside, temporality, and being as care. Care is in concern for all the things in the world, which comes from the temporal consciousness. That's a really bad and fast description of it. It's as fast as I can go. It's not very detailed. My discussion of the Husserlian transcendental ego was way more detailed. But essentially, Heidegger's Dasein and being in the world is existentialized in that that Dasein is in each case mine, and it's existentialist essentially. It's existential. While Husserl's can lead you down a certain kind of not so objective way, because the idea of transcendental idealism has been accused of being subjectivist or solipsistic. With Heidegger's being in the world and Dasein, there's no way that his ontology of being could possibly be charged with that. So, in my opinion, we would have to go with Heidegger, because to go with a certain kind of practical normative theory based on this idea of the self, because there's no possible way it could be charged or accused of being subjectivist or solipsistic in any way possible.